It matters.
I'm Katie Lannon, in for Adam Riley. Tonight on Talking Politics, ShotSpotter devices listen for gunshots and trigger police responses in Boston and across Massachusetts. But a new ACLU report finds the technology gets it wrong more often than not. I'll talk to an expert from the ACLU and an executive from the company behind ShotSpotter ahead. But first, it's just been over a year since Philip Eng took over at the MBTA, stepping into the role amid widespread slowdowns, staff and equipment shortages, and federal scrutiny after a long string of accidents, including multiple deaths. Eng promised to usher in a new way of doing business and quickly launched major repair projects and temporary shutdowns. A year in, has he managed to get the T back on track? I'm joined now by GBH News transportation reporter Bob C., who led a forum with Eng earlier this week, along with a few other transportation officials and advocates, including Transit Matters Executive Director Jared Johnson. Bob, Jared, thanks for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Good to be here.
So, Bob, you had the opportunity to sit down with the people in charge of the T, including the new GM, Phil Eng. What were your big takeaways from that discussion?
Well, I think it's important for people to realize that Mr. Eng is probably the first experienced professional transit administrator we've had in probably 10 years to run the MBTA. And he's also a very focused person who really understands what the job entails. And if you heard what he had to say on our forum Tuesday night, you'd see that. Plus, there's an openness. He talked a lot about communication. It was really important for the T to be communicating with people. And for many years, they were not doing that as openly as they should have been doing. Certainly, there are still lots of problems, which he will acknowledge have to be fixed. But a lot of people feel he's the right guy at the right time to try to fix the T.
Yeah, and Jared, I know there's been kind of a lot of enthusiasm from people in the transit space about having Phil Eng in this role. People seem to be very optimistic. Have you seen a difference, things he's doing differently than past leadership?
Absolutely. I think we noticed that, I think, really acutely last October whenever the T had one of their first major shutdowns on the Red Line, and it was a stark contrast from how things went whenever the Orange Line shut down. And so we saw the track work actually bear fruit in terms of shorter travel times, and we saw that they were asking some of the right questions, like, well, wait a minute, why are we saying that the track needs a week to tamper down? We could just bring in equipment to do that, and then bring the speeds up, the first day when the first day that service returns. And so we've absolutely seen a market change, and I think whether it's the transparency or whether the communication, there's definitely a clear difference between Eng and some of his predecessors.
And so in that forum, we have a little bit I want to play of, Bob, you asked Philip Eng why he wants to be on this job. We can play a piece of that.
I've always wanted to ask you, were there some mornings you woke up and wondered how you got yourself into this situation?
I wanted to come. When you see the needs, and one of the reasons that so many folks are here tonight, and when we don't do what we say we're going to do, that's why people get frustrated. We make an impact on people's lives, and what we're trying to do is make a positive impact on people's lives, and I know we can.
So, Bob, what kind of impact has there been since he's been on the job?
Well, I think it's refreshing to have somebody like Phil Eng on the job, and he speaks openly about the challenges. He speaks openly about what has to be done. But he has a systematic way of addressing these problems. For instance, the track improvement, which was in chaos, and T was mostly reacting to emergencies that were taking place. He actually came up with a plan, we're kind of 1/3 of the way through it this year. It almost is rebuilding the entire system. I mean, that's how big the problem is. But at least he has a plan now. And he's been able to tell people months in advance what they can expect. And that certainly is different from what used to be.
So this is a big job. It's certainly a daunting task to be head of the MBTA at a time of all these challenges. I want to look back about a year to when Phil Eng first took on this role. We had Doug Most on Greater Boston. Doug Most, former editor of Boston Globe magazine, an author of The Race Underground, looking at America's first subway system here in Boston. Here's what he had to say when Philip Eng first took this job.
I think Boston over the years has probably gone through several boxes of Band-Aids trying to fix its system. He'll be able to find ways to improve, some alerts and maybe make some cars better, maybe make a few tracks better here and there. That will happen. But Bostonians, I think, are hungry for bigger changes than just that. And that's going to require real investment.
So, Jared, I'll ask you here, where are we in terms of that investment? Is the state putting in the resources the T needs?
They are starting to. I think that whether it's the governor's budget, which added a lot more into the T's operating budget, and the House budget, which even increased that further, I think we're starting to see that. But the T talked about their upcoming capital budget and noted that in order to do the track improvement program, that they did have to take money from other projects, including a bus facility that serves 50% of the city of Boston. So there are still real needs there, and the work that the general manager is doing is incredibly important. But it means that if we want to continue on with some of the modernization projects that the T needs, or some of the expansion projects that the T needs to do, and that there's broad support for, there's going to need to be a lot more investment, a lot more money.
So, and that House budget is up for debate next week. House leaders have said they're putting or proposing to put a record amount of investment into the MBTA. But Bob, as I look at your reporting, that's fiscal year 2025. The T is still looking ahead to the following fiscal year, fiscal 2026, a possible deficit. At the same time, we've still got all these safety and reliability improvements. We've got plans to roll out a low-income fare program. How do they do all this with the fiscal constraints that are true in all of state government right now? Well,
as you know, the governor appointed a special task force headed by Transportation Secretary Monica Tibbetts not to look in to long-term sustainable funding for the T. It's something that we've heard a lot about over the years, the need for some kind of sustainable, dependable funding source. So it will be very interesting to see what they come up with at the end of this year. There's a lot of options. Politically, what's possible is another situation. And I noticed the governor talked about border tolls, putting tolls at the borders of Massachusetts and other states. I'm not sure that would really work that well, because we'd find ourselves having to pay to go to Rhode Island, for instance. So, but they're at least examining everything they possibly can, because they're going to need everything in order to fund this project.
And Jared, this transportation financing is really something that's been vexing to Beacon Hill for years. I remember before COVID first took hold in 2020, the House was looking at doing something to give more funding to transportation in Massachusetts. How optimistic are you that this task force and other efforts will actually yield results?
I'm cautiously optimistic. I think the real answer is we don't have a choice. The economic engine that drives the entire Commonwealth, is the it's the Greater Boston economy, and we can't, and that relies really heavily on the MBTA. And we've seen how we went from, I think, being the third highest, in terms of traffic, to now I think #1 in some rankings. And so it really is critical. You add on whether it's the traffic angle, the economic angle, and then now we have the housing angle with the MBTA Communities Act. We just have so much riding on the T that we don't have a choice. And I think one of the other positive sides is that, you really have municipalities, you have business leaders, you have advocates, not just transportation advocates, but advocates across a whole, wide swath of different focus areas, really calling for investment in the T and calling for the T to be better. And so that gives me hope, because there's a really broad swath of folks saying that we need to do better, and hopefully that will give the legislature and the governor, that will give them the support they need to embrace some of those bold but sometimes politically tricky options that we need to have on the table.
And I want to key off of something you just said about the interrelation between housing and transit and all these other issues. I'm going to play another little clip from the forum. We have MassDOT Secretary Monica Tibbetts-Nutt talking about what's needed to fix congestion.
Transportation has a housing problem, and it really is. We bring down the cost of housing, I can get people closer in and get them off the road for these entire journeys. If I can get enough funding for the T and I can bring down the cost of the commuter rail, you will see thousands and thousands of people getting out of their cars. If you cannot address those two things, it's going to be very difficult for me to ease the congestion unless everyone is going to stay home. And the people who need to drive in these hours, they have to go to work in person. This is a massive equity issue.
So, Bob, tied up here, we have housing, we have transportation, we have climate change, we have equity. How does the state get a handle on all of this?
When I first started covering transportation, people would ask me why, and that's exactly why, because it affects everyone in so many ways that you don't even realize it. Whether you take the T or not, it affects you. And I think it's very important that Phil Eng demonstrate that the money that's being invested in the T is being spent wisely and effectively. Because if he can do that and convince legislators, he'll make it much easier to get the money he needs to address the problem. In the past, that hasn't been that way. There's been a lot of skepticism about whether spending money on the T was worth it. And I think that we'll see over the next year, if he can demonstrate that he can accomplish what he says he intends to do, that will really help politically in the future to get the money. But there's no question, there's a big bill coming due for a lot of things, but especially transportation.
All right, so a lot to watch moving forward in the budget debate and beyond. Bob C. from GBH News, Jared Johnson from Transit Matters, thank you so much for joining us. Bob's full conversation with Jared, MBT GM Philip Eng, and MassDOT Secretary Monica Tibbetts-Nutt will be soon available on the GBH Forum Network YouTube page, along with thousands of other lectures, talks, and interviews with some of the world's foremost scholars, authors, policymakers, and community leaders. Next up, police in cities across the country, including Boston, use ShotSpotter devices to detect and respond to gunshots before a 911 call is even made. Or at least that's the idea. But the devices get it wrong a lot. According to a new report from the ACLU of Massachusetts, nearly 70% of all ShotSpotter alerts in Boston led to dead ends. And now the ACLU is urging city leaders to end these programs. I'm joined now by Cade Crockford, the director of the ACLU of Massachusetts Technology for Liberty Project, and Tom Chittum, senior vice president of forensic services for the company behind ShotSpotter, SoundThinking. Tom, Cade, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Tom, I want to start with you. For people who aren't familiar with ShotSpotter, what is it and why do you see how does it work and why do you see it as a good technology for places like Boston?
Well, if you didn't know before, you might assume that the system was powered by magic. It's not magic, it's math, it's science, and it's technology. We measure the arrival of sound at different sensors to calculate where the sound of gunfire originated from, so that we can notify police of shootings quickly, so they can respond to them and render aid to gunshot wound victims, so they can locate offenders, so they can collect the valuable ballistic evidence that's left behind at many shootings, and can reassure the community that when gunfire happens in their neighborhood, police will respond to it.
And we have Cade, you looked at, the ACLU did, at over 1,000 BPD documents related to ShotSpotter. What did you find?
That's right. So we asked the Boston Police Department for records documenting incidents in which police responded to ShotSpotter alerts between the period of 2020 and 2022. And we got 1,300 records in response to that request. We carefully analyzed those records, and we found that in almost 70%, in 69% of cases, when police in Boston were deployed to an area in response to a ShotSpotter alert, they found no evidence of gunfire. So that means no witnesses, no victims, no suspects, no shell casings, no bullet holes, nothing of the sort.
We actually have a chart from that report we can show, breaking that down, showing the almost 70% of alerts, as you said, result in no evidence of gunfire. And that also showed that 16% of alerts were from other kinds of sounds, like fireworks, vehicles backfiring. Tom, I want to ask you, is this how you think of the accuracy of the system?
Well, I think that's misleading. So we measure the accuracy of our system across all of our customers. Of course, we take our accuracy seriously because they depend on us. And what we know from measuring our incidents across millions of incidents and more than 170 customers is we get it right about 97% of the time. Just because police don't locate physical evidence of a shooting is not evidence that a shooting did not occur. But I also think it's misleading to focus on percentages. When you look at the nominal numbers, that means hundreds of times ShotSpotter has notified police of shooting incidents. And what we know is there's chronic underreporting of gunfire in many of the communities that are most afflicted by it, which means there are lots of missed opportunities for police to render aid to those gunshot wound victims, to investigate those crimes, and to have a low friction contact with the citizens that live in those communities, to reassure them that the police do care about them, that they have not been abandoned. If you look at headlines across the country and you remove from them those pieces that are opinion pieces, what you see are the facts. That is that ShotSpotter works. We are locating gunfire. We are leading police to crime scenes. We're leading them to victims. We're not simply getting lucky. The technology really works.
Kate, what do you make of that? The idea that these are, without looking at percentages, these are gunshots and gunshot victims, injuries that might not be reported otherwise.
Well, so the records that we reviewed, as you said, indicate that 16% of those cases were actually just other loud noises. So, in fact, one of them was really disturbing, was a piñata at a birthday party. When it finally burst, it made a loud noise, apparently, a noise that was loud enough to fool ShotSpotter's technology and staff of human reviewers, and I would like to get into that for a second as well, into thinking it was a gunshot and not a piñata. But lots of other loud noises can trigger ShotSpotter alerts. Cars backfiring, construction noises, someone slamming their garage door. There are a lot of loud noises in an urban environment that can trigger ShotSpotter alerts, particularly fireworks. In fact, my understanding is ShotSpotter has a fireworks suppression mode that the company engages on, holidays like July 4th, because it's actually not possible to distinguish between loud noises like fireworks and gunshots. And for those of you who live in Boston, as I do, in fact, I live in a neighborhood where ShotSpotter is used. The summer is one long fireworks suppression mode. In my neighborhood in Dorchester, there are fireworks pretty much every day of the week, constantly in the summertime in Boston. So, that's one of the reasons why this technology is pretty specious. I think it's important to focus on the 30% figure as much as it is on the 70% figure of cases where the police found no evidence of gunshots. I've seen some comments online of people assuming that in those 30% of cases, police were dispatched to the scene, they found a suspect, they arrested the person, case closed, like a kind of NCIS-style investigation just wrapped up because of this supposedly, advanced technology. But all that we found in those 30% of cases is that police found some evidence of gunfire. That doesn't indicate that ShotSpotter led police to a shooting victim. It doesn't indicate that ShotSpotter led police to a shooting suspect. It merely indicates that maybe, in some of those cases, police arrived at the scene, interviewed people in the neighborhood, and someone said, yeah, I heard a gunshot.
So, Tom, what does happen when ShotSpotter identifies a gunshot? How does it work, I guess, in a way, both in terms of, maybe not too deep into the technology, I understand that, or it's going to be complicated, but how does a gunshot get identified, and what happens when a police department gets this alert? Yeah,
well, it's not true that we can't distinguish between gunfire and fireworks. In fact, we continue to review alerts on 4th of July, New Year's Eve. We notify our customers of gunfire. Just this last New Year's Eve, we led them to many actual shooting incidents. But what happens is ShotSpotter can't tell you the who of gunfire. We can tell you the what, we can tell you the when, we can tell you the where, sometimes we can even tell you the how. We have documented a significant increase in the use of illegal machine guns to commit crimes. But then it's up to the police to investigate what happens. And so, like any tool, ShotSpotter is more effective depending on how you use it. We go through several steps to distinguish gunfire from not gunfire. We have been deployed deployed here in the Boston area since 2007. The technology and the processes we use have evolved significantly. So to the extent that some of those mistakes may have occurred in the past, and I don't know that they have, we're not making mistakes like that today. The fact of the matter is we are very often leading police to crime scenes. Just last month in Dorchester, we led police to the shooting scene where they located a gunshot wound victim, and subsequent investigation led to an arrest for it. Last year in Dorchester, near Franklin Field, we located and alerted police to a mass shooting that involved 5 victims, including 2 kids. This is beneficial to the people that live in those communities. It helps them get the police services that they deserve.
So you mentioned Dorchester and Cade. I think the ACLU analysis had some findings that a lot of the ShotSpotter sensors here in Boston are located in Dorchester, in Roxbury, in places where there are a lot of communities of color. Is
That's
that
right.
inaccurate?
Yeah, they're almost exclusively in communities of color, not just here in Boston, but across the country. And of course, the police and likely ShotSpotter will say that's because where gun violence is located, and there's no question that gun violence is located in particular neighborhoods in the city of Boston. There's also no question that gun violence is a very serious issue for particular communities in the city of Boston. And it is our view at the ACLU that that is precisely why it's so important that we have a conversation about technology like ShotSpotter, because this is, this is not a opportunity neutral conversation. You know, if I were diagnosed with a serious illness, I wouldn't want my doctor to prescribe healing crystals. I would want, the real regimen of medicine that's going to make me better. And I think when we think about gun violence, something so serious, we really ought to be looking very carefully and closely at the evidence, not just anecdotal information, but data and evidence about what programs work, what really works to drive down gun violence, what really works to help law enforcement build relationships of trust with communities that are implicated by gun violence to reduce gun violence. And frankly, not just here in Boston, but across the country, the data that we're seeing about the use of ShotSpotter indicates that it is not a tool that reduces gun violence, that it is not a tool that across a longitudinal study conducted by academic experts, a peer-reviewed study, found reduces gun violence or increases the amount of gun violence arrests or successful prosecutions. At the same time, and that's to say it does not do those things, according to this study, at the same time, if we're having Boston police officers respond in 70% of cases to ShotSpotter alerts finding no evidence of gunfire at all, there's an opportunity cost there for the Boston Police Department, which, numerous city councilors have raised concerns about is a strapped department, needs more resources, needs more boots on the ground. So, if we're sending detectives to spend time that detectives could be using doing something more productive, taping off a street corner in my neighborhood, for example, in response to a ShotSpotter alert, looking for ballistics evidence that may or may not exist, that's an opportunity cost for the city. And so, it's our view at the ACLU that the cost-benefit analysis is pretty clear, that the technology does not benefit public safety and actually raises a lot of very serious civil rights and civil liberties concerns that I hope we can get into. At the same time, we are 1,000% interested in having a robust conversation informed by evidence with folks from the administration, with folks from the Boston City Council, with the Boston Police Department, so that we can get more information about exactly how the BPD uses this technology, how they believe it impacts public safety, bring in, academic experts to evaluate the evidence that we've seen here in Boston and in other communities to make sure, frankly, that we're spending our money, not just the grant money that actually, is sent to ShotSpotter for this program, but also the city taxpayer dollars that are spent paying Boston police officer salaries who are spending a tremendous amount of time responding to ShotSpotter alerts, when in fact they're not finding any evidence of gunfire.
Tom, I want to let you respond to what Kate has said there, but I also want to ask you, I think a lot of the information that we've seen publicly about where ShotSpotter sensors are located comes from a Wired investigation into some leaked data, which used American Community Survey information and that leaked data. That investigation found that nearly 70% of people who live in a neighborhood with at least one sound thinking sensor identified in the data as either Black or Latina. Nearly 3/4 of these neighborhoods are majority non-white. The average household earns a little more than $50,000 a year. How does ShotSpotter decide where to, or SoundThinking decide where to place the ShotSpotter sensors?
Well, I think Kate and I probably agree on more than we disagree on. We want safer communities. We want just policing. We want robust protection for our civil liberties. I have long admired the ACLU and its mission. But where we disagree is on the role that ShotSpotter and similar technologies can play in helping bring those things about. So as Kate rightly points out, gun violence is not spread evenly across this country. It disproportionately affects some communities. And so when people say, isn't ShotSpotter disproportionately deployed, I ask, did you also search to see where gun victims disproportionately occur? The fact of the matter is, ShotSpotter is important public safety infrastructure. People in those communities deserve to be safe. They deserve to have effective police response. We know that a lot of gunfire that occurs in those communities is not reported to police for some heartbreaking reasons. People fear retaliation, or they have resigned themselves to living that way, and they don't have to. ShotSpotter helps fill that gap, notifies police so they can respond. I think we definitely agree that police should be responding in a way that's just, that's effective, that respects the rights of law-abiding citizens. At the same time, failing to solve violent crimes in these communities is itself a root cause of crime. We must hold violent criminals accountable and protect the people that live in those communities.
If I could just say, we totally agree that solving violent crimes is very important. The evidence shows that ShotSpotter does not meaningfully advance police investigations in serious shooting incidents. I mean, that's what data shows from longitudinal studies across the country.
So I'm familiar with those studies. Read them carefully. They say that ShotSpotter does what ShotSpotter says it will do. It notifies police of more gunfire, faster, with greater precision, leading to recovery of greater evidence. What the authors of those studies say, though, is that they don't have great insight into the investigative follow-up that occurs. If they did, I think that what they would find is that's where the breakdown occurs. And this is something that we need to promote more of in law enforcement generally. Effective follow-up using crime gun intelligence to solve actual violent crimes.
Okay, I think that's the note we're going to have to end on for today as we continue watching what happens in Boston. Tom Chittum from SoundThinking, Kate Crockford from the ACLU of Massachusetts, thank you both for being here tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's it for tonight, but do come back next week. And let us know what you think. The email is talkingpolitics@wgbh.org, and the website is gbhnews.org/talkingpolitics. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Welcome to